come to a conclusion, not resolve their problems. Because eventually the feds are going to write a check for 10 or 15 billion to save California. That's the GM syndrome. Same thing is happening in General Motors right now as they figure out which divisions to sell, which lines to keep, and which lines to drop. Well, if we screw up, so what? We're too big to fail. The third syndrome, and this is what I call the AIG syndrome, because this is really, I think, the most detrimental to all of them. AIG, as you know, was bailed out by the federal government because it reinsured all these strange securities that were based on real estate transactions that suddenly became almost valueless. So the federal government pumped literally more than $100 billion, estimates as high as $150 billion, $160 billion into AIG to keep it afloat. What did that do for AIG? Well, whether you call this the AIG syndrome or the stock market syndrome, the concept is the same. It insulated them from all the bad risk decisions that they made. Just like buying out California's bad public finance infrastructure has allowed California to defer for yet another year fixing the structural failures that are implicit in our system. And across the economy, whether it's in California or New York or any of the big union states or any of the other states who haven't already built some sort of financial balance mechanisms into their budget processes, we see this imaginary number, that money that suddenly shows up, is an easy way to avoid the realities that they're facing. I think it's important to recognize that it does sort of 5 things. It hides the weaknesses of the processes. It hides our overdependence on single revenue sources. Part of California's problem is half our money comes off of, 60% of our money comes from less than 1% of our tax base. The wealthy in California pay that. If you look at the city of New York, at APM, the budget director was there and he went through it. Almost all their tax revenues, more than half the money comes from less than 5% of the tax base in that category. An overdependence on single sources of revenue. It hides the hubris of the local fiscal decision making. The power politics that go into making these deals in the back room that nobody hears about, that we all pay for. It doesn't create a situation where those can be brought to accountability. But probably the most detrimental is that it prevents that dialogue about trade-offs that I talked about before. My friends sitting down and deciding whether the rent was more important than the dance lessons. We don't have a conversation about whether another year of pension benefit for a firefighter is more important than providing access to health care for a 3-year-old girl whose family makes $27,000. Those are the trade-offs we are making. But because the processes are so biased and the system is so convoluted, we don't have the opportunity to make those. So, I've been a sourpuss for a long time now. I want to talk about the good news. There is good news. Just like my friend losing his job created an opportunity for him to go out and start his own business. And it's struggling, he's working hard. But he's managed to get it off the ground, and he actually sold his first application to the App Store at Apple. And he's excited. And he actually sold his first unit. He was excited about that. It created an opportunity. Their household is better situated to deal with the vagaries and uncertainties of the next 5 years in California. They have a better sense of priorities. They know what the important things are for them, and they're planning now on how they're going to take care of those obligations and those needs. As we move ahead through these times, if we can get past the obfuscation of the stimulus package, which has distorted our perspectives, we have the opportunity to remodel California's public finance system. And it's not to say it's not possible, it is possible. It has to be done. What we have is not sustainable. You know, your patient is sitting there hemorrhaging on the floor. The first thing you do is you stop the hemorrhaging. Because if you don't stop that, it really doesn't matter if you stitch up the wound. Right? We have the opportunity right now to stop the hemorrhaging in state and local finance by having a legitimate conversation about what's going on. To do that, we need to have leadership. We need to have people step forward and say, this is what needs to be done. That is happening in many jurisdictions, especially at the city and county level. Those conversations are happening. State governments are much more complicated creatures. They'll move more slowly. But even in California, we've gone as far as to say, you know what, let's throw the whole thing out and start over. And there is actually a legitimate initiative to qualify a constitutional convention for the ballot in California. I think that if we think about what our responsible challenges are before us, there are 4 themes that need to come to mind as we take care of our patient. First, we need to stem the hemorrhaging. We need to make changes immediately in those areas where our spending does not reflect our priorities. If we're going to say our priority is educating children, then it shouldn't be on funding teachers exclusively without looking at the linkage between funding teachers and the education they're providing. Los Angeles Unified, long maligned as one of the evil institutions of education in our country for its failure to be responsive, has embraced the idea that in fact innovation is the only solution. That breaking down the traditional bonds of the bureaucratic school district those bonds have to be destroyed. And LA Unify is now going to allow some 250 schools to be, I won't say privatized, but experimented with. Now, will there be some successes? Absolutely. Will there be failures? I'm certain. The question is, are those failures going to be worse than where we are now? And in the case of Los Angeles, we've made a decision to put, like I said, 250 schools up for this process. They just announced the first round of eligibility in the last week, and they're certifying people as we speak. This is happening. So out of the ashes of this economic disaster, we might actually see some opportunity. But once we stem the hemorrhaging, we need to start looking at the structural cures, and there are 4 concepts that I want us to take with us. I use the acronym CARE, because our patient's so sick. The first is, the C is a commitment. We need to identify to whom we're committed and for what purposes. What are our priorities as a state, as a city, as a municipality, as a county? What are the things that are important to us? What are we trying to accomplish? And what are the core parts of that mission? Not what is everything we do, but what are the core parts? What are the most important parts of that process? The second one is accountability. Understanding who should be doing it. Right? We need to know who's responsible for LA Unified. Is it the local council? Is it the board of trustees? Is it Mayor Villaraigosa? Who are we going to hold accountable? That accountability needs to be defined, and the responsibility needs to be given to those individuals to make it happen. And this is true at local government levels as well. The accountability. The third is responsibility. And by responsibility, I'm not talking about the idea of accountability. I'm talking about living within our means. We need to agree that we're not going to be able to do everything. Not even what we did before is possible. We need to agree that we're going to have to do less. That we're going to have to accept that. And that we need to live within our means. That the money we have is the money we have and the money that we can spend, not the money that you might have tomorrow. And then finally, there's the concept of essentiality. What do I mean by essentiality? What's essential? We talked about commitment to who and for what. What's essential? What is it we really have to do? If we are going to do less, what are the things that are most important for us to do? Now, one of the primary creeds of the medical profession, and as we move ahead in this process, there's going to be lots of temptation for us to not just care for our patient, but to try and make the patient a different person than they are now. And one of the things I will say as we do that is, the most important thing to remember is the doctor's creed, which is, at first and most important, do no harm. Make sure that the things that we do change are not things that destroy those core functions and responsibilities of government that we all come to expect. So I think there is the opportunity and prospect for hope. It's going to require, and I think we will see in some jurisdictions, inspired leadership and a commitment by the people to an open dialogue. I think we're going to see other places where those things don't happen, and you're going to see the results of those side by side. This is a great opportunity for a laboratory and an experiment in democracy, and also an experiment in how to deal with accountability. If you're going to give somebody responsibility, how do you hold them accountable when it's all over? And those are the fun parts of the process where we get to be particularly creative. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, and I'm hoping that a year from now, it'll be a much happier conversation. Thank you.